Mike with Betapixels here. Today, we're going to be looking at Sigma's 100 to 400 for the Sony E Mount lens. Let's go over some of the specs with this lens. It is again, of course, 1 to 400, and that is on the full frame side of things. If you have APS-C, you will of course benefit from the longer reach. It has an aperture range of 5 to 6.3, which isn't terrible. And given the focal range, it is pretty decent. That said, some might be wondering where that stop breakdown is and how it goes. Like if you were hoping that f5 would carry on to 2 or 300, doesn't quite work that way. Your first change comes around the 113 millimeter mark. It drops from f5 to 5.6 at 113-ish millimeters. After that, it'll maintain 5.6 up to about 235 millimeters. And then from 235 millimeters is the remainder where you're at f6.3. So the widest aperture is really only available at the absolute minimum focal range for this particular lens. It is what it is. There is weather sealing built into the lens, both on the mount as well as around the innards, which is important since it externally zooms. You've got your your zoom lock right here on the barrel, which is only usable at the smallest 100 millimeter range. And then you also have a handful of buttons here that take care of a number of functions, such as your autofocus, manual focus toggle, your focus range switch, which works from 0 to 6 meters to infinity and full range, autofocus lock, and then your image stabilization phases. Off 1 and 2. Off is of course off. 1 is what you will spend most of your time in if you're just out and about shooting, and then 2 is more so for panning. But that covers that as far as specs go. Oh, and price is perhaps the most exciting part about this, is that compared to the Sony, which is around $2,000, this lens is $949, which is fantastic. And on one hand, if you wanted to match the Sony as far as like inbox items go, you would have to spend a little bit more, as Sigma, while they do support a foot on this lens, remove this collar, they do not ship it with the lens, and that is a minor annoyance, but they kept it under $1,000, which is pretty great. Brings us to this gigantic collar, this gigantic hood. Just unzoomed in its minimal state. That is a big boy. And since it externally zooms, you can see that it is quite a lot of lens to work with. You'll notice I keep turning the zoom lens the wrong way, or the zoom ring. It is reversed in the Tamrons, so I'm still not catching that, even though I've had this lens for a little while now. Every time I put it on, in terms of zooming, it's like the first time I've ever used it. Yay me. Should you buy this lens? If you are in any way into outdoorsy type of photography, animals, birds, that type of thing, and you don't want to spend Sony prices, or you're not a pro photographer raking big bucks, or a hobbyist or enthusiast, I mean, you really don't have a choice. If you want that longer focal length, you don't want to do the Sony, this is pretty much your best bet, and it helps that it's considerably cheaper than what Sony has to offer. And I would say if you don't shoot any of those things, even then it's not the end of the world, you may have seen some videos on YouTube of other photographers that have done street photography with longer focal lengths. And some people kind of criticize that, so you can't do street photography, or that's not street photography, without getting off on a tangent on what is or isn't, and just the silly labels that get placed on things like that. Yeah, you can shoot street photography with 28mm prime. You can shoot street photography with this 1-400. You can shoot street photography with a 2-600 if you wanted. You're in the street, you're shooting, you're taking pictures. If it creates a unique look no one else has gotten, you got, the shot, who is anyone else to say that that isn't a thing, that isn't street photography? Of course it is. It's all relative. Rant aside. If you want a longer reach in your camera bag, this is a pretty awesome lens to have. Like I've talked about before in other videos, it's a great tool. And if you do have the time or the money for Sony's lenses, still should you get this one over the Sony? That's a bit harder of a conversation. Especially if you're a professional and making money off of the art. Even if it's a point of diminishing returns, I think the argument of you get the best that you can afford tends to win out. So in that case, the Sony ends up being the one to get for a few reasons, but it's not going to be make or break, honestly. And if you get into the price range that the Sony is, it also opens up some other questions, such as, do you get the 1-400? Do you get the 2-600? Which I've seen the 1-400 and 2-600 compared, and depending on what focal length you average shooting at, the 2-600 often comes out sharper at a given length, just because the nature of what it's designed for. In addition to that, it is an internal zooming lens, so there's some additional reliability that you don't have to deal with on the 1-400s, which the Sony is also, the 1-400 is also external. But you have that option, and then if you want the 2-600 but don't always want the 2-600, you have the option of the Sony 1-400 with either their 1.4 or 2.0 teleconverters, which, yeah, they have some of their own trade-offs, but if you're looking for reach, you shoot primarily wildlife, birds, typically do that in the middle of the day when it's very bright, so losing a stop or two with a teleconverter really isn't the end of the day, or the end of the world. I think this is an overall fantastic lens for what it is. It is a great tool to have in your bag, and it does work with a number of shooting scenarios. Do you have to always shoot? Is this just a bird lens? No, but it's certainly a good one. So let me know what you think. Drop a comment below. Do you think that Sigma's everything it's made out to be? Do you think it's worth saving some cash, getting this and not getting the Sony? Or do you already have the Sony and you're thinking of potentially getting the Sigma? I'm curious as to why you do that. Drop a comment below and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.